Hello and welcome to Diaspora Connect on AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa. The program showcases what Africans in the diaspora are giving back to the continent. And today, I am at the campus of the United States International University, Africa, here in Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm here to talk about the diasporan issues with the Vice Chancellor of this university and the coordinator of the Carnegie African Diaspora program here in Africa. My name is Prof, the host of the program. You are following this discussion on all the social media handles on the screen and then on our dedicated website, tv.aau.org. We are going for a short break, and when we come back, we talk about the diasporan issues in Africa. Stay tuned.
Are you an institution or individual? Do you intend to organize a memorable event to be archived for future reference? Then look no further than AAU Studios, because it's your best bet. With our spacious studio and state-of-the-art media equipment such as 4K Panasonic video cameras, KinoFlow lights, assorted microphones, live streaming machines, and others, you are sure to get the best of production. Visit us at Trinity Avenue, East Legon, adjacent the National Accreditation Board, or contact the AAU studio via the following addresses: info@aau.org, AAUTV@aau.org, Ransford@aau.org. Alternatively, you can call us on 0244 185 998 or 0244 693 342.
Welcome back from the break. This is Diaspora Connect on AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa. I am here at the campus of the United States International University, Africa, here in Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm here to talk to Professor Paul Zeleza and Miss Evelyn Musa, who are going to talk about everything diasporan. Prof, welcome to AAU TV.
Thank you so much.
And our program is Diaspora Connect.
Thank you. I'm honored to be on your program.
Thank you. You are a diasporan, but
Yes.
you are here in Africa.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I joined USIU Africa in 2016 after spending 25 years as a faculty member and academic administrator in Canada and the United States at about 7 different universities. So coming back to the continent, in this case to Kenya, was really part of that story of the diaspora return.
So you are a living example
That's right.
of what the diaspora is giving back
That's
to
right.
Africa.
That's
We'll
right.
talk more about your experiences. But Madam, can you also introduce yourself briefly and what you do here?
Thank you very much, Ransford, for coming to our campus here at USIU. My name is Evelyn Anyal Musa. I coordinate the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program that works with the diaspora, African-born diaspora in the US and Canada to come back to Africa, 6 African countries: Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa, to work with universities on 3 areas: curriculum development, graduate students, teaching and mentorship, and on research. And they get a chance to come back for a period of between 3 weeks to 3 months.
Okay. Can you please clarify something? When you say African-born diaspora, what do you really mean?
I mean, Africans who they were born in the continent. These are scholars who were born in the continent but moved on to the US or Canada to reside there. Yes.
What about the first generation Africans, those who were born maybe in the US and had nothing to do with Africa? Is the program also covering them?
Not for now.
Okay.
Not for now. We are only working with the African-born diaspora scholars, but that is in the plan because we realize that there are many diaspora scholars out there. The ones who were born there, the historical diaspora scholars, and so we have a plan to work with all of them because they all have an attachment and connection with the continent.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Prof, let me come back to you. Can you give us an overview of the higher education landscape in Africa and whether African universities are even competitive?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very important issue, and it's something that, as a scholar, I've been looking at, and of course, as an administrator. Africa has made certain strides in terms of higher education, but we still face enormous challenges. So let me just very quickly identify some of the strides we've made, but also the challenges. The first one is institutional supply. The number of universities on this continent, of course, has grown tremendously over the last several decades, particularly the last 2 decades. But we still lag behind the rest of the world. In 1970, there were 170 universities on the continent. Last year, according to the World Higher Education Database by the International Association of Universities, we had 1,682 universities. Now that's huge growth, but that only represents 9% of the more than 18,000 universities in the world. So we still have a long way to go to provide enough institutions for our young people. Secondly, in terms of enrollments, while again we have made tremendous strides, our enrollment ratios are very low. So for the continent as a whole is 13%. For sub-Saharan Africa is 9%. North Africa is about 34%. The world average is 38%. For the developed countries is 77%. So again, there is a huge deficit in terms of provision of higher education to young people on this continent, which we need to continue working on. The second challenge for us is finances, resources for higher education. While these institutions are growing in number, they are not always matched by the growth in facilities and the maintenance of facilities. And here we are talking, of course, both the physical facilities, classrooms, labs, libraries, but also we are talking about electronic infrastructure, which is increasingly important in the delivery of education because of all the technological changes that are taking place. And many of us are tuition-dependent institutions. So the issue of diversifying revenue streams is something that we all need to work on, including, of course, fundraising from alumni, from the high net worth individuals in our countries, and so on. The third challenge is, of course, the one of faculty supply. There is a deficit in terms of faculty. When I was in the United States, for example, when you advertised for a job, you literally got hundreds of people applying who had PhDs. When we advertise here, you are lucky to get 3 or 4. So the supply of faculty is a serious challenge, particularly as our institutions expand. Just to give you an example, in Kenya, we have 74 universities. And out of these 74 universities, the faculty in those universities about 18,000. And of those, only 34% have doctoral degrees. At USIU, we are better than that. We're about 73%. So the issue of faculty supply is one we have to deal with. And the fourth challenge is, of course, the products of our institutions. And the products, I'm thinking of 2 things. One is research. You find that our research output on a global level is very low. So the entire African continent, for example, in 2014, produced about 2.6% of global scholarship. And the number of our researchers, again in global comparative terms, is 2.4% of global researchers. And this, of course, is because our expenditure on research is relatively low. The average for the continent, of course, there are differences. I'm talking about averages. We spend only 0.5% of our GDP on research and development. The world average is 1.7%. And for North America, it's 2.7%. And if you look at the entire African expenditure on research and development, only constitutes 1.3% of global R&D. And no wonder our productivity in research and our competitiveness in terms of research, and that also means our ability to address the pressing challenges facing this continent tend to be limited. The other challenge we face is leadership. A lot of the appointments for university leaders are highly politicized, particularly in the public institutions. And the opportunities for university leaders, whether you're talking about chairs of departments or deans or DVCs or VCs or members of the boards of university councils or boards of trustees, for training and leadership skills development in running higher education institutions is also limited, which affects, of course, the effectiveness of governance and leadership of our institutions. And then maybe finally, one of the challenges we face in the higher education sector on the continent is the whole issue of the regulatory environment. A lot of our regulatory bodies either lack capacity or even when they have capacity, they tend to be too authoritarian and too interventionist, and they want every institution to look the same, which inhibits creativity for the development of these institutions. And maybe just one last point, and that is the question of internationalization. While our institutions tend to copy institutional models, and even our research tends to reflect theories and paradigms and analytical traditions and perspectives from other societies. Our contribution in terms of internationalization of education with regards to the flows of students is also limited. We are not serious players in this vast global market for international students. Many African universities, if you ask them, the number of international students will be, very, very minimal, probably less than 1%. At USIU, we're a little more fortunate. 15% of our students are international, and we have students from 74 countries.
Wow, 74 countries?
Yes.
Wow. That's a rather gloomy picture that you are trying to paint. But I don't know whether this is actually real in terms of whether African universities can even compete globally. If you look at the global ranking of universities, the first 100, you will not see any African university.
Right.
What are we not doing right?
Right. I think the way I look at it is we have to face the real challenges facing the sector, because once we understand what those challenges are, that's the only way we can develop solutions.
Okay.
So as an analyst, I look at the real data.
The real data.
Doesn't mean that we can't solve these challenges. We can solve these challenges. Fundamentally, what is needed for us is massive investments in higher education.
Right.
In higher education, human capital, in terms of faculty, investment in terms of resources, in terms of facilities, and of course investment in terms of research. And this one is not just the government that has to do it. It has also to be the private sector. It has to be civil society. And it has to be the alumni. If you look at Ghana or Kenya, I can bet you that most of the very prominent people in Ghana and the very prominent people in Kenya are products of the University of Ghana and products of the University of Nairobi.
Right.
How much are we contributing as products of these flagship institutions to the resources of these institutions? If you look at the global north, of course, many of these universities, the big ones, your Harvards, your Oxfords, a lot of the money is actually coming from alumni. Now, so we need to develop that culture of giving. So it's not just government, it's the private sector, it's the alumni. And once we have the kinds of resources for these institutions in terms of teaching facilities, learning facilities, research opportunities and support systems, our universities can be competitive. You have to remember, in the 1960s and early 70s, University of Ghana, University of Nairobi, University of Dar es Salaam, Makerere, University of Cape Town, you name it, the flagships were globally competitive.
Well, we'll go on a break, but before that, I have a question for you. Way back about 40 years ago, there was a Lagos Plan of Action in which African countries were to contribute 1% of GDP to research and development. But you painted a picture, or you gave statistics that show that we contribute less than 1%.
Yes.
Is it a situation of lack of political will or misplaced priorities?
Both. Lack of political will. Africa is very famous for making wonderful resolutions, the Lagos Plan of Action, and you can trace the whole range of those plans, including on science and technology and innovation and investments in those sectors. The plans are there. The issue is the will to implement them, and of course priorities, putting the resources where our aspirations are.
Okay. We'll go on a short break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about the diasporan issues and why the diaspora need to come to Africa to contribute their quota for the growth of the continent. Let's go on a short break. This is Diaspora Connect on AATV. Welcome back to Diaspora Connect on AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa. I am here at the United States International University, Africa, in Kenya, and I'm talking diaspora issues. Now I move to you, Madam. The African Union sees the diaspora as the sixth region of Africa, and they are making overtures to attract Africans in the diaspora to come back. How impactful have these overtures been over the years?
Thank you. Yes, the African Union clearly recognizes the African diaspora as their sixth region, and because they definitely realize that they have lots of resources that they can contribute back to the continent, but as a union they are yet to do that. It has been foundations and private institutions that have managed to do this.
Okay.
And one very important program that is currently going on diaspora is the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program, funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. And the diaspora have been greatly impactful. For example, if we look at the impact the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellows have created in the 6 countries on curriculum development. Almost, as I speak now, since the program started in 2013 to date, we can talk of about 109 curriculum that has been handled. A number of them have been approved. We can talk of about 250 students that have been taught, both on campus by the fellows visiting, but also virtually. We have classes going on virtually after fellows leave the campuses. We also have research mentoring. We have had fellows having impact on doctoral research projects. Fellows who come have also gained a lot of knowledge from the host institution, but also the host institution, the hosts themselves have gained a lot of knowledge in different areas, knowledge on of course research, knowledge on fundraising. And the host institutions, yes, they have hosted the fellows, but the hosting period has also impacted other institutions, through workshops which have been held at the host institutions, workshops on different areas of importance to the higher education sector. And also there is continuous collaboration going on between the host institutions and the fellows, which have connected them with the fellows' home institutions. So there is sustainability in terms of collaboration between the fellows' host institutions and home institutions. And fellows have also had a chance to present papers at international conferences in collaboration with their host institutions. So there is a whole range of other impact that has resulted from the initial fellows visits. Fellows have also managed to raise other funding beyond the initial Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship funding that has enabled them to continue working with these institutions. Some have even come back on their own funding to continue working with these institutions, mentoring students and doing collaborative research. So there is a lot of impact that the diaspora scholars have brought into the African institution. And so that is where then the African Union needs to pick up from, so that we can continue impacting other countries, because right now we are only in 6 African countries.
Okay, so there should be a replication. Okay.
There should be a replication in other countries as well, so that because the problems in the 6 African countries does not stop there. These are problems which are realized in all the other African countries, and so if this the impact that has been realized in these countries can be expanded, that would really help address the challenges that we are currently experiencing in Africa.
Okay, perhaps Prof can help me in the next question that I want to ask. Was there any capacity gaps that were identified by Carnegie before they selected these 6 countries to, run the program?
Yeah, I had the privilege and honor of being asked by the Carnegie Corporation of New York in 2011 to conduct a research project on African-born academics in Canada and the United States and how they engage African higher education institutions. This was based on a lot of previous work I'd done on the African diaspora. And then in 2011, we did a lot of surveys in North America, Canada, and the US. And then in 2012, did surveys on how African institutions perceive the diaspora in the higher education sector, from ministries of education to the universities themselves. And we combined this into a report that I did for the Carnegie Corporation in 2013, which identified areas of serious gaps. One, of course, was the development of innovative curricula. Secondly, was the whole question we talked about earlier, research capacities on the continent and the need for collaboration with people who are committed to Africa, in this case the diaspora. And the third issue was the pipeline issue in terms of faculty, in other words, the training of graduate students. So we identified those 3 areas, and the program, as she said, started in 2013. And it has a very innovative structure in terms of global academic exchanges. It has a 4-tiered structure. So it has the Carnegie Corporation of New York provides the funding, and they only identify these 6 countries because their charter allows them only to work in these 6 countries.
Right.
Secondly, then you have the advisory committee, advisory council, which I chair, which has prominent African academics and administrators in Africa itself, in the UK, as well as in the United States. And then thirdly, you have the Institute for International Education, which runs the Fulbright programs in the US. So they have vast experience in terms of global academic exchanges. Then we have the Secretariat, which Evelyn heads, which is based here at USIU, that coordinates the work of all these organizations. So as she says, the program has exceeded all our expectations.
Okay. The Cardiff program, or is it the
Cardiff?
The Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program is a flagship one in Africa. 2019 is the year of return of the diaspora. 400 years after the first Africans left the shores. And talking about diaspora, we're talking about not only going to the US, you have those who went to China, England, India, elsewhere. Now let's focus on those who went to the US. How prepared were the diasporans in the US in responding to the call to come back? How prepared were the academic diasporans? Were they, picking the overtures? Did they organize themselves? Or it was just business as usual, coming for cultural exchanges without putting, organizing themselves as an academic body and coming to make a direct impact on the year of the return of the diaspora?
Thank you very much. Yes, the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program is, I would say, it's one of the many programs that allows diaspora scholars to come back to work in the continent. There are many of them, but I would say the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program is a little bit different because it is more organized in terms of it is institutionalized. It has established a very clear system and model of mobilizing and working with the diaspora, connecting them with the institutions in the continent, creating mutual connection with the continent, because otherwise we have many diaspora scholars coming back to their countries either of birth or any other countries in Africa to give back, but we are yet to see any that is well modeled, like the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program that has been monitored. It has been well documented, and can serve as a clear pointer, to others who would want to come and work in the continent. And so in terms of preparedness, yes, the preparation is well done, because we work with Institute of International Education in New York, which has mobilized, which has been in academic mobility, in higher education mobility for many years. And so the academicians in the US, and now with Carnegie also in Canada, are well institutionalized and well organized and well prepared to support Africa, and in the areas of key importance to Africa, because the way the application is done, the institutions in the continent request for the diaspora scholars, and so they identified their needs in the institutions and request for the scholars who have particular experience and skills in those areas.
Maybe I could address the historic diaspora.
Okay.
The program, when the research was being done, originally it was to focus on the entire diaspora, including the historic diaspora, on which I've done a lot of work. The historic diaspora has been tremendously involved in African affairs. Politically, we know the Pan-African movement started in the diaspora.
Yes.
People like Kwame Nkrumah, the great Kwame Nkrumah, was very much influenced by the diaspora, the Pan-African congresses and so on. The diaspora was also very critical for the decolonization of Africa, including, of course, the end of apartheid,
yes,
in terms of affecting, influencing U.S. Foreign policy. The diaspora has been providing human capital to the continent, the historic diaspora, for quite some time. The challenge has been the mobilization of the diaspora. And talking of the 400 years, commemoration of the arrival of the first captive Africans in what is today the United States, I was actually at that commemoration about 3-4 weeks ago. And what struck me is the need for us as Africans on the continent to really understand the histories of our people on the other side. Of course, the first captive Africans did not go to the Americas 400 years ago. It started before then. It started in the 15th century, 16th century, before the US in the 17th century. And the diaspora possesses enormous skills, enormous capital, financial and otherwise, human capital. So when I was doing the research, for example, while I found there were 25,000 African-born academics in the United States, the historic diaspora, you're talking of several times that number. When you're talking about financial muscle, the contemporary African diasporas, last year, for example, remitted $69.5 billion. Now, that's a lot of money.
Yes.
But, and that's Africa's biggest donor, by the way. It's not China, true. It's not the EU, it's not the Americans, it's the diaspora. But when you look at despite the oppression and marginalization of African diasporas, they have enormous financial muscle relative to the continent. So, for example, the African Americans as a community, about 44 million of them, their collective consumption power economically is about $1.2, $1.3 trillion. That is more than the economy of South Africa, of Egypt, and of Nigeria combined. Africa's economy is about $2.4 trillion. So it's more than half. The entire African continent. So we need to seriously think about mobilizing the historic diaspora.
Prof, because when you say we need, who are the we?
The we is the governments. They have to be serious about mobilization of the diaspora, not just the recent migrants, but the historic diaspora. Private sector, institutions like ours, universities. Do we make deliberate efforts to try to attract African Americans, African Canadians, Afro-Brazilians, Afro-French, Afro-British, you name it. And of course, there are diasporas, as you mentioned, African diasporas in Asia. So it is across the board, from governments to the private sector to institutions. And this is where now we're in the process of setting up what we're calling the consortium of African diaspora scholars programs.
Okay.
And that consortium is going to build on the Carnegie program and build on the mandate of the African Higher Education Summit to mobilize the entire diaspora for the higher education sector, not just the African-born.
Okay.
So it will be to mobilize wherever they are, to anywhere on the continent, not just the 6 countries,
All right.
and to not just the fellowships in terms of the academy, but also in terms of how can we facilitate the engagement with the private sector.
Right.
How can we use the scholarly diaspora to build capacities, not just in universities, but also other sectors of our economy.
So my final question then goes to Madam Musa. Sustainability beyond the Carnegie program.
Thank you. And just as Professor Zeleza has said, the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program has had enormous impact in the continent. And so then our question is, how do we extend this impact to other African countries? And so the Advisory Council of CADIP saw it right to form the Consortium of African Diaspora Fellowship Programs, Consortium of African Diaspora Scholars Programs. That is going to extend the benefits, the impact of CADIP to the whole of Africa. And so the consortium has been registered in the US as a 501c organization, and also it has been incorporated in Kenya as a company limited by guarantee. And this is going to give us an opportunity to bring in new funding into the program and to bring in new stakeholders and new partners into the program, and enabling the program to work in different countries, impacting on different areas which are of importance to the continent development. So for us, it's a great opportunity for us to now expand into the whole of Africa.
Okay. Do you think working without the support of the African Union will give you the needed impact? It looks like these initiatives are one done by individuals or networks, but I haven't heard the political policy maker, the African Union, in all these deliberations.
If they are currently missing, probably it's because they are yet to appreciate the impact of the African diaspora scholars. And we are currently involved with the AU at the level of the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, especially the higher education cluster. And we would clearly appeal to the African Union to support this course, which they have clearly put in their mandate as the 6th region of Africa.
Okay. Your final words, Prof. Do you think Africa will ever be ranked among the first 50? And if so, when?
I think it's possible, and we have to make deliberate efforts.
Okay.
One of the things I would urge African governments and the regulatory agencies is that we need to develop a highly differentiated higher educational system that is also well articulated. So we need to identify certain institutions as flagship institutions where you provide all the resources in terms of both research and human capital development, in terms of graduate studies. And those institutions, and they're already there. So your University of Ghana, Legon, your Makereres, your Dar es Salaams, your Nairobis, your UCTs, and so on and so forth. They need to be primarily, in my view, graduate institutions, focusing on graduate and therefore training for the entire system. So the shortage of faculty I talked about, but also in terms of world-class research, addressing Africa's pressing challenges and not mimicking research problems from elsewhere. So I think it's possible. And part of that is the mobilization, not just government, because government has limited capacity, but also the high net worth individuals. I'll just give you one statistic. By December 2018, Africa's high net worth individuals, people with more than, net worth of more than $1 million, were 169,000 on this continent. Their collective wealth was $1.7 trillion. Many of these people are products of our institutions. Many of them give to institutions in the global north. How many of them are giving to us on this continent? Now, part of it is not that they're not willing, but universities, we have not developed the capacity or the culture to talk to them.
Sure. Weak linkages.
Yeah. So universities need to be very intentional in having very strong linkages with government beyond the regulatory equation.
Right.
Strong linkages with the private sector. Strong linkages with civil society. Strong linkages with intergovernmental and international organizations. You mentioned the AU, but they are regional economic communities, ECOWAS, East African Community, but also the intergovernmental agencies in terms of capital, African Development Bank. These are huge resource bearing institutions that, working very systematically and strategically with universities, we can capacitate our universities to be globally competitive. There is no reason why we cannot be among the top universities in the world. Because when our scholars go to the global north, they're in those institutions and they do it.
Yes.
The only thing that is missing is the resources and the political will.
There is a saying that a good conversation never ends. And we can't talk and talk and talk because the diaspora issues are broad. But this is where time will allow us on this episode of Diaspora Connect on AAU TV. And it's been very interesting talking to Professor Paul Zeleza, who is the Vice Chancellor of United States International University Africa, and Ms. Evelyn Musa, who is coordinating the Carnegie African Diaspora Program. Stay tuned into other programs on AAU TV. Take care and bye.